The book I'm going to read you is called Nelson's Dangerous Dive. Mayday! 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 We need help quickly. Our boat is sinking in the storm. The crew knew that their old fishing boat was in urgent danger, but calmly waited for the rescue teams and helicopters to locate their emergency beacon and save them. As the crew were winched to safety, they looked down and saw the heavy fishing nets pulling the back of the boat down into the crashing waves. As the bow of the boat started to rise up, the long nets began to unravel, slowly dragging the boat underwater, where it settled on the rocky seabed deep below. Over many years, nature began to reclaim the boat, turning it into the magnificent reef which was home to many different types of sea creatures. Brightly coloured corals of all shapes and sizes grew along the rails and over the decks. Smooth, gliding sharks circled the wreck, chasing the fast-swimming fish that darted around the wheelhouse, whilst crabs, lobsters, rays and octopus all found a home among the corals. One day, a curious young whale called Nelson spied the wreck looming out of the sandy depths below. Astonished to see such a strange, colourful sight, he took a huge breath and with a flick of his impressive tail dived into the shadows to see what treasures he could find. Deeper and deeper Nelson dived as the colours around him gradually faded. Once his eyes grew accustomed to the gloom, he could see the hulk of the boat appearing beneath him, the fishing nets trailing far behind in the swirling currents, looking like waving beds of seaweed. Nelson began to explore the wreck, when out of the corner of his eye he saw something flash past in the darkness. As he turned to investigate, his huge tail stretched out behind him, and he was captured in the nets, bringing his whole body to a shuddering stop. Thrashing about and getting more entangled with every movement, Nelson had to use all of his determination to try and break free of the terrible ropes and the nets made of plastic, which had bound him to the wreck. Nelson used his huge strength to try to power through the water, and the whole wreck started shifting around on the seabed as he desperately tried to escape. Suddenly, with a loud snap, the rusty chains holding the ropes broke free, and he found himself floating sluggishly upwards. Nelson was now almost completely entwined in the net, floating up in the slow spirals until he reached the surface, finally breathing huge lungfuls of fresh air. Lying still and resting on the surface, Nelson managed to find enough strength to raise his tail and slop it down hard enough on the water, frantically trying to signal his need for help. Splash! 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 The tremendous sound each tail slap created was quickly noticed by a nearby boat of tourists who cautiously motored closer to see the commotion. They saw Nelson's enormous and powerful body wrapped in heavy green fishing nets and utterly powerless to free him. He urgently needed their help if he was to survive, and yet how could they help such a giant animal without risking their own lives? Bravely, the people decided they had to help. Using their boats, knives, they cut away the nets, one strand at a time. As each rope fell away, Nelson felt the pressure around his body start to ease, and he had a fight to urge to swim away, knowing he still needed their help. Leaning dangerously over the edge of the boat, surrounded by nets and the mercy of the powerful whale, the people had a huge task ahead of them. The giant nets were so tightly wound around Nelson's body, the knives seemed to barely make a dent in their work. Yet slowly and surely, the nets became looser, until finally only the enormous tail remained tangled. Nelson's long fins were now released, and realizing he could swim, he started to head further out to sea, pulling the boat behind him. His rescuers were in extreme danger now should Nelson decide to dive. They had no choice but to be towed by him as he swam on. Before tiring at last, he finally stopped. Quickly now, aware of the danger they were still in, the people excitedly cut the few remaining strands of the net from around his tail, and Nelson was at last completely free. As he disappeared quickly out of sight beneath them, the tourists celebrated their incredible encounter with this beautiful creature. Suddenly, a huge shape powered up from beneath the water as Nelson burst out of the sea into the most spectacular breach. Great big splashes of glistening water cascaded down around him as his magnificent body rejoiced in its freedom. Time and again he dived down, only to swim quickly up and out of the sea in a towering spray of seawater as he showed off his powerful tail and flippers for all to see. As Nelson swam away for the last time, the people hauled the rest of the heavy fishing net safely aboard the boat. The captain knew that if the net was left in the water, it would trap even more animals like Nelson. He thought there could be more nets down on the wreck and called the local expert diving group to help him clear them. The team of divers arrived quickly, carrying out safety checks and surveys to work out the best way to remove the remaining nets. Fishing boats have many ropes and nets made from different types of plastic, and the wreck still had several large nets tangled around it. The divers were all highly trained to remove these nets, as it was very dangerous underwater work. Using special equipment and knives, the divers cut away the nets, sending them carefully up to the surface to be pulled into the waiting boat. Every piece of rope or net they removed would save many turtles, dolphins, seals, whales, fish, octopus, crabs and lobsters from becoming trapped over the years, and the divers felt very pleased knowing how important their work was. As the last of the nets were brought up to the dive boat and the divers started to head for home, they heard an almighty splash just behind them. Looking around quickly, they saw Nelson slapping his enormous tail once more, happily leaping out of the sea with his new friend in a spectacular and rare double breach. He was finally free of the nets that had been lost at sea, free to breach and dive, to swim and explore once again.